Okay, class. So in these sessions, we will study about something called default arguments in inline functions. Okay, let's go for it. So a default argument is a value provided in a function declarations. So if the caller of the function does not provide a value for the parameters, the default value will be used by the functions. So here, this is a function declarations. We are providing a default value for second parameters and third parameters like this. And if the caller does not give second and third arguments when calling these show volume functions, the default value, which is 1, will be used for the second argument and 1 for the third argument as well. There are some rules in default arguments. Default arguments can only be used with call by value parameters. So default arguments cannot be used with call by reference parameters. And you can specify default arguments for one or more parameters. Like this one, we specify default arguments for 2 parameters. And default arguments are assigned from right to left. So once the default value is given to an argument, or subsequent argument must have the default value as well. So this is error because the third parameter of this function does not have a default values. And default argument should not be given a second time. So you should give default arguments when the function first declared, and should not give default arguments again in subsequent function declarations or definitions. Let's see the demo code for that. So this is an example code. Here we have a function declaration of show volume, and here we have a function definitions. And here we have a function call. We are calling show volume in 3 different ways. And when we compile this program, this program should lead to compiler error. Let's see whether compiler gives error or not. Default arg. Yes. So the compiler is complaining about this default value. So as I said in the slide, that the default arguments are assigned from right to left. And so if the arguments are given the default values, all the subsequent argument must have a default value as well. But even though the second argument has a default argument, because there is no default value for the third parameters, so that is the reason why compiler gives compiler error. So if I give a default value here, like let's say, let me give a 2 here. If I compile again, now compiler error goes. And if I execute this one, the first function call passes 3 arguments. So these 2, 4, 6 are passed to these 3 parameters. And if we multiply all these values, that's 48. So program prints 48. But in second function call, we pass only 2 arguments. So length is 3 and width is 5. And because it did not give the third argument, we use the default value for the third argument, which is 2. So 3 times 5 times 2 is 30. So it prints 30. And for third function call, it only passes the first argument. So length is 7. for the second and third arguments, we use a default parameter. So 7 times y's default value is 1 and highest default value is 2. So 7 times 1 times 2 is 14. So it prints 14. And I also said that default argument should not be given second time. So we already gave a default value in function declaration. So we cannot do something like this. So if I do this, I'm giving a default value for third argument 2 times, which is not correct. So if I run this program, compile this program, as you can see here, the compiler is complaining about redefinitions of default arguments, this one. So you should not give a default value for second time. Okay, let's go back to the slides. Okay, we just saw this example showing the default value. So let me briefly introduce you about inline functions. So inline function is not a new feature of C++. You can also use inline function in C program as well. So inline function is the function where the compiler insert the function definition at the place where its function call is happened. So by doing this, the overhead of the function call can be eliminated. So it is more efficient. But function substitution is totally compiler choice. So it is not always guaranteed to be inserted. So in order to use inline functions, you use inline keywords. Function declarations or function headings. So like this, we use inline keyword. And because its function body is inserted in place of function call, generally we use inline functions for very small functions. And we can also define inline function in header, this pattern. If not defined, define, and if is common pattern used in header files. Almost all of the header files use these patterns. Basically, it prevents duplicate definitions. So here, if not defined is a directive, and it must be closed with sharp and if directive. So these two are pair. In this example, if the macro, your mass age is not defined before, it will define your mass age macro here, and also it will declare these inline functions. So these two lines only execute. These two lines only process if your mass age is not defined. So next time when your compiler process this header file, because your mass age is already defined, these two lines, this one, will not be processed, which prevent duplicate definitions. So if not defined directive is very similar to if-else statement, it allows for conditional compilations. Let's see the demo code for this macro. So macro C. So here I'm using if not defined macro. And I said these two are a pair. And I'm also using if not defined macro here as well. And here I use define directive to define HSJ macro. So HSJ is defined in this program. So if I compile this program, let me compile this program first. Let me give this name. macro and macro. So I compile this program, and this compile produces this macro binary file, which is an executable file. So if I execute this binary file, it will print this CP not defined. CP not defined. This program only prints this line, not this line, because HSJ macro is defined. This line is not executed, but since CP macro is not defined in this program, this line of code are executed. So as I explained in previous slides, this is very similar to if and else. So if HSJ is not defined, print this, like this one. If CP is not defined, print this. But the difference between if and else statement and this if not if def directive is that this process before the compiler happens, so it's preprocessors. So what I mean is that this part of the program, so this source code will not be included in this binary file macro. Only this part of the source code will be included in this binary. So that's the big difference. So in if and else statement, even the if statement produce first condition, that part of the source code will always be included in the binary. But if we use this directive, only true part of the code will be included in the binary file. So let me show you about this one. So macro is a binary file compiled by this one. So if I look at this macro, okay, so let me first do this. So since macro is a binary file, you cannot read this binary file. So if I open this file, it's like this one. It's not readable. Only the machine can understand this binary file and execute it. So human cannot understand this. So if I macro disassemble macro binary. By the way, this is the out of scope for this C++ program course. So just look for fun. You don't need to understand this part. What I'm doing is I'm disassembling this binary to see how compiler make this source code to the binary. So if I use this disassemble main, so I'm disassemble main function now. So this part of the source code are compiled to like this in binary form. So if you look at this, this is a core, it's calling function. So we are calling function like that. So if I look at this address, as you can see here in this address, there is a string exists CP not defined, CP not defined. But if you look at this program, it does not have this string in this binary. So what I'm trying to say is that only this part of the source code is included in this binary, and this part of the source code is not included in this binary file. So that's the difference between if not def and if and else statement. Okay, so let's go back to the slides and So in these sessions, we talk about the default arguments. When we are not giving arguments, the default value will be used by the parameters, that's default arguments. And we also talk about quickly look at the inline functions, which improves the efficiency of the program. And we also look at the if not def, define, and end if directive. These patterns uses a lot in the header file to prevent the duplicate definitions. Okay, that's it for these sessions. See you in next sessions.